last week's class, which is in chapter 20, and we're holding by the words of v'kol shekain l'gabi b'chinas levush hapnimi shu ha'machshava shemimenu nimshachu hadiburim v'hi chayusa. So we basically said these actual words, but we're going to pick up from here. Basically, the Alter Rebbe is telling us of the bittul of Olamis legabe in the face of the energy, the godly energy which vitalizes them. And I say bittul of Olamis, meaning to say the nothingness of world in comparison to the energy which vivifies Olam. And we're saying this in a very brief statement, but again, as we elaborated last week, one could look it up and see again on the websites which carry this class. So we elaborated on this point over here that ultimately the world was created bidvar Hashem shamayim nasu, was created with Hashem's speech. And we quoted what it says, Ki b'ka Hashem tzur ilamim, that Hashem tzur, He created ilamim, which is plural. So the Medrash tells us, the Chazal tell us, that ka Hashem tzur ilamim, that Hashem created the yud, the ilamim, which is ilam hazeh and ilam haba, with two letters, b'yud nivra ilam haba, and with the hey nivra ilam hazeh. So the whole entire chayis, energy of the world, is ultimately from one letter of Hashem. Now, we mentioned this last week as well, that it says Basar Mamoris Nivra Olam, that Hashem created the world with 10 sayings. So firstly, you see the common denominator between this Chazal and Basar Mamoris Nivra Olam, that it's all about Maimer, it's all about Hashem saying, which He infused into reality. So, but in the end, ultimately, when you see Asara as opposed to one us, which is the Hey, because you're dealing with the subdivisions, as the words of the energy of the words of the Hey is broken down to the Asar Mamad, is based on the 10 times Vayemer, 9 actually in Bereshis, 9 in Maimer, who, like the Chazal tell us, which Hashem spoke creation into being. But ultimately, you're dealing with Dvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu, that the words of Hashem, the heavens were created, and again, Shamayim B'chol Tzvaya, Bereshis Bara Elokim Es Hashemayim V'Haaretz, everything was created by Dvar Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe points out over here again, in the flow, in the Hemshech, is in the spirit of the previous class, the Alter Rebbe points out over here that gives a mashal, gives an example, like one word by a person is totally insignificant. Now, just to point out, we mentioned this term insignificant quite a few times. It's not that the Olam is insignificant, meaning to say that it has no purpose, it's just there. No, chas v'shalom, there's a great purpose. Hashem created the Olam in order that we should do our Aveda with Torah mitzvahs, lasses le'yizbarach dir v'tachtein, to make this home, this world, a home, an abode for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It has an important purpose. Quite on the contrary, even dealing with this Olam as opposed to other Olamis, this world as opposed to other worlds, the purpose in everything is this world, which is again based on the famous Medrash in Pashas Nasi, which we quoted a few times, and Alter Rebbe later will elaborate. When we deal with insignificance, means to say the Olam on its own, the makeup, the texture of Olam, the world on its own, not its overall purpose, ultimately it has this nothingness in comparison to the Dvar Hashem, which is Mahava Machai Mekayim, which means in comparison to in the face of the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Alter Rebbe goes deeper over here. Not only that we know, and again, this is the message over here. Not only do we know that the whole Chayis, the energy of Olam, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's energy. In other words, as we mentioned the previous week, it's not Keil HaOlam, that there is a separate entity which is called Olam, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in charge and gives it chayes, but the entire Olam, the texture of, in other words, gives it what it needs. in its mere makeup, but ultimately it exists as a mitzius, as an entity. Even though Hakadosh Baruch Hu is memale, Hakadosh Baruch Hu is in charge of every single prat. He is the vitality of every single prat, every single detail that exists within Eilam. But more so, we said Kel Eilam, not Ha-Eilam, but Eilam, that the world itself, the Eilam itself is ultimately Kel. There is no two entities, a world and God, which is in charge. But as we elaborated in the previous weeks, it's Kel Eilam. The world itself is ultimately Kel. It's part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem Echad means to say that it's not that there is the Echad says that the Ches and the Dalet, like we learned in a few, like the quoted that Maimer Chazal, the Zayin and Rakim, the seven heavens, the earth, and the Dalet Ruchas Ha'elam are the Aleph. This is the Eibishter himself. Again, we quoted this in the previous weeks. But Alter Rebbe over here says more than that. That the Dvar Hashem, or together with that, which demonstrates this point much clearer, that the Dibur of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ultimately the world was created with one Dibur, with one saying, with one us, with one letter. Now you can understand the nothingness of Eilam in comparison to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in comparison to the source, the Sheirush Makir, where the world comes from. So here the Alter Rebbe gave a mashal, just like by the human being. That one us, one letter, we have the koach of dibur, we have the ability to speak. Now one letter, take one letter of a human being, how much a person speaks in one day, for example, thousands of letters that he pronounces, that he utters every single day. Take one us and put it in the face of all the letters that he spoke that day. And then put it in the face of all the letters that he spoke in the last week, or all the letters he spoke in the last month, the last year. The more you broaden the amount of aces which every human being speaks, the more the insignificance or the nothingness of that particular us in comparison to all the aces which a person would speak. We gave example that one leaf in comparison to a tree doesn't have much significance in comparison to the overwhelming amount of leaves. And that's one tree. And take 10 trees, take a whole forest. The more you point out the quantity of the leaves, in other words, the more you demonstrate the great quantity of leaves which exist in front of this one leaf loses its significance as a I am. No, in comparison to all that, you become more and more not. So when you're dealing with one us, even of a human being, one letter, us is a letter, one letter in comparison to all the ICs, all the letters a person speaks, in one day or 1 week, the more when you say 1 week or 1 year, all the letters that a person would speak throughout his lifetime. And if he lived for Yet Chaim Nitzchim, he lives, in other words, the reason why there's a limit is because that's how much the person lived. But theoretically, if he lived on and on, he would be able to speak on, and that word, that one ought, in comparison to all those words which he speaks, which he utters, is naturally the more ices the person would express, the more that ought, that one letter, in comparison to all the multiple letters which the person verbally extracts verbally, which demonstrates the great quantity of letters and words the person speaks. And so you take that out in comparison to all that, it is completely nothing. Or it's more and more, the more you broaden the quantity over here, the more the ice it loses its importance, its significance as an independent us. The Alter Rebbe goes on and we're saying this briefly over here, or we're going to try to say this briefly just to get to the flow of the next step. What the Alter Rebbe is trying to point out more, again, a greater demonstration of the nothingness of Eilam, which was created with one us in comparison to the very bigger picture of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Alter Rebbe says not only the letters, the words that a person actually spoke, because then you can say that, and ultimately we gave the example, the 1 teaspoon of the Mediterranean. What is the significance of 1 teaspoon in comparison to all the water of the Mediterranean? You could even say nothing. It's near to nothing, almost nothing. And how pathetic would be a statement that someone say, I made a little dent in the Mediterranean, I took out a teaspoon. Ultimately, like we mentioned last week, true infinity doesn't exist in this world, but still it's incorrect. It's something wrong to that. That statement is not acceptable. Because what is 1 teaspoon in comparison to all the trillions and there's no really number how many teaspoons there are in the Mediterranean. There's someone going to say that I took out a teaspoon for the Mediterranean. It's an incorrect statement. Or I emptied it, or I made a dent in it. So the same thing when you say 1 os in comparison, not only that's not only how much the person spoke, because ultimately there are numbers. The person at the end of the day could say, I spoke 10,000 letters I uttered. In a week, so many and so much more, 70,000 letters. So the Alter Rebbe adds to that even though you're dealing with enormous quantity, but in the end of the day, you can't say that it's completely nothing, because 1 in comparison to 10 is truly less significant than 1 stands on its own, and 20 lose less significance than 30, and so on and so forth. But can you say that, in other words, basically, because you're dealing with quantity over here, so you cannot say that the Olam is batal b'mitzias completely, that this 1 letter is ultimately, let's focus on the us itself, and this letter is batal completely b'mitzias. In other words, it completely loses its entity as any existing significant us, because you're dealing with quantity. So that's what the Alter Rebbe adds, not only the how much the person spoke, but how much he's able to speak. In the koyach hadibur which a person has, he's able to speak le'en ketz. He's able to speak infinitely, as long as naturally he lives. So there, because you're dealing with, you cannot count the other otiyot and to say where there's so much and so much in comparison to this 1 ot, because he didn't speak those otiyot. They're in a koach of, they're in a state of koach, not in a state of poil, in a state of potentialities, and in a state of potentiality, you cannot count. But what you do, how it does reflect in that 1 ot, that 1 ot loses more and more its significance, or becomes more and more nothing, because you're not dealing with thousands or millions of otiyot to say, well, it loses its significance, but it's still there. It's still 1 out of 1,000,000. You take 1,000,000, you pull out 1, it's no more 1,000,000. In other words, this is something which is countable. So the Alter Rebbe adds, in comparison to the koach nafsham daberes, the potential, the koach hadibur of man, that he could really speak forever if he lives on naturally. So there's no number. The numbers, you cannot pinpoint the numbers. So then that 1 ot, which has been already uttered, that 1 ot loses more and more its significance. It becomes more and more in the face of the koach nafshei hamidaberes. It becomes more and more nothing. Now, the Rebbe goes on and says that after all said and done, you're still dealing with the koach of dibur, and dibur is still dealing with Isis, so you cannot say it's completely nothing. So the Rebbe points out that the Isis hadibur, the letters of speech, even in the world of koach nafshem daberes, which we say again, in the potential state, you're still dealing with letters that the person can't potentially speak. So the Rebbe says that you want to see true more and more bittul, more and more more and more nullification of this 1 ot in comparison to a higher and a deeper level with a nefesh. Let's creep a level higher. So the Rebbe went on to the world of thought. In the world of machshava, as we mentioned last week, that a person ultimately thinks in a certain manner as well. Not only he speaks in a certain way, but he thinks in languages, which means that ultimately there are otiyot, there are letters in the world of thought of man as well, just like it's is evidently in speech. But in speech it's definitely more evident, it's much more constructive, it's much more concrete words, as opposed to the aces of machshava. There it is more subtle, it is more refined, it is more soul type of letters. And just like the soul has a certain sense of infinity, the machshava, the world of thought, doesn't have those finite barriers or those finite foundations or makeup in the way it comes out in the world of speech. A letter is uttered, you could see the beginning, a word is uttered, you could see the beginning, you could see the end, especially when it's written down, or when it's said, one could pick it up and say, this is what I said, this is what I heard, and so on and so forth. In the world of machshava, the same, as we mentioned last week, the simple example, that when it takes a person to think, to say rather, for a few hours, he could think it in a few moments, maybe even in a few seconds. And how is that? If ultimately he has to express it in a few hours, why can he do that? Why can he think about the whole concept in a few moments? The answer is that this is the duality, duality which exists in the world of Machshav. On one hand, there are atheists. Like we said, a person thinks in a certain language because there is structured letters. But on the other hand, these letters are extremely subtle. They're so more of a soul type of ice, soul type of otiyot, soul type of letters, and therefore it's not measured with time and place. It's more of a soul expression, or it has a measurement. It takes a few moments for someone to think something, but ultimately you cannot compare the way the otiyot are formed, the machshava in thought, and the way it is given out, the way it is expressed, b'dibur in speech. There it's more concrete, much more structured. This is again, we mentioned, this is the beginning, this is the end, from a word, from a letter, and so on and so forth, as opposed to machshava. There are letters, but the letters are much more refined. And therefore, getting back to what the Alter Rebbe is trying to bring out over here, that till now we spoke about the bittul, in other words, the nothingness of the one letter of HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, Behei, Vikashem, Tzuri, Lamim, dealing with the Hey which he created, L'Lam Hazet, take that a one ut. In comparison to all the Isis HaDibur, the letters of speech, and more so the Alter Rebbe went even deeper, the Koyach HaDibur, the Koyach, the potential, the Koyach, in other words, the Dibur, the way it stands in the state of potentiality. Which is again, you're dealing with a koyach. You did not come to expression yet, but still it's the world of dibur. So then you cannot say that one us is completely loses itselfness as completely, because as much as you're dealing with an enormous amount of letters which were uttered, or even the kech nafshi hamidaberes when it stands in a state of koach, which did not come to expression yet, but you're still dealing with kech dibur. So you cannot say that it does not exist. It's complete, absolute nothingness. But take that us, that one dibur, in comparison to the Isis HaMachshava, there it's not only a bottle, and again in the world of quantity, but there it's bottle, which means it loses its selfness in a way of quality, because the quality of Machshava, it's a qualitative difference. About that one us of dibur in the world of machshava, because the isis, the mere letters, the way it stands in machshava is a different type of letter. It's more of a spiritual, it's more of a refined, more of a soul type of letter. So that one us, in comparison to the isis and machshava, are much more. Again, stands that one us loses completely its entity. And again, it's essentially a state of nothingness in comparison to the Elam HaMachshava, the Isis HaMachshava. Now, we're going to see how this is all still part of the mashal. We're going to see how it reflects in the nimshal, because Alter Rebbe is naturally going to say that just like we have thought, speech, and action, HaKadosh Baruch Hu also has, even though it says that Maimer Shal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Choshev Maisa, Maimer by HaKadosh Baruch Hu's speech and action are tantamount with each other, because again, that by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by Hashem, his saying ultimately, there was no difference the way by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by the Maimer and the Maisa, because as we know, Hashem spoke creation into being. Hu Amar Vayeh, he said and it became. Vayeh Melekimihi Vayeh. So the Eibishter's Maimer is similar to Maisa, but on the overall, just like we have the Machshava Dibur Maisa, thought, speech, and action, so does HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and quite on the contrary. Because if you see we have it, is just because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has it. Everything down here evolves in the way it's L'mayla. And if we have it, obviously it's not the same. It's Kaviyochel. It's not the same. You could never. There's a Havdalah, Lahavdil, between Nivra, a created being, to the BAYT, to the Creator. But if you think about it on its own, when we speak about machshava and dibur and ma'aser, that man has thought, speech, and action. The only reason why he has it because it exists l'mayla, in the higher realms, and here it evolves from those higher realms. Because similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu has machshava, dibur, and ma'aser, but the Alter Rebbe is going to go deeper. We also have something deeper, even which something in a dimension within our soul, or an expression of the soul, a deeper dimension within the expression of the soul, which is called the midas, our feelings, our attributes. Our love, our fear, our kindness, severity, and again, there's the 7 midot which we dealt with in the previous chapters, which are the man's 7 attributes, feelings, and so on. which ultimately produce the thought, speech, and action as we know it. When you feel for something, you start thinking about it, then you would speak about it and eventually do it. Hopefully a good thing, and so on. And similarly, yira, fear of something, you think about it in a certain way and you react, again, speech or action, by not doing, not closing, and so on and so forth, which again in the context of Torah mitzvahs is leis mias mitzvahs asay, mitzvahs leis asay. But what leads to thought, speech, and action is ultimately the midas, the faculties of the attributes. And then there's the intellectual faculties, which is chachma bina das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. So there are deeper levels within the nefesh, but you're talking about the structure of the nefesh. Again, this is what we learned in the previous chapters, namely starting from the third chapter, that the nefesh, the soul of man, is comprised. It's not dealing with even the yid. The soul of man is comprised of these 10 faculties: wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, which again, these are the intellectual faculties. These produce the 7 midas, the 7 attributes of man. According to what you understand, that's the way you will feel. If you understand something thoroughly, and that will, the explanation, the rationale of that understanding would be that this is something I should get close to. There it'll evoke, it would express itself via a love, a drive to it. If it's something that it explained me to stay away from, or in the context of Avodas Hashem, awe, reverence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, etc., that will produce, it's a tolda, it's a production, it's an offspring, it will produce a feeling of yira, of fear, and so on and so forth. So everything starts with Chabad, which is Chachma Bina Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and then it expresses itself in feelings, and those feelings go on to the garments of the neshama, as Alter Rebbe pointed out, again, in the 4th chapter, there are the garments of the neshama, which is the thoughts, the speech, the action. So there's the neshama itself, which is comprised of the 10 faculties, and then there's its garments. So again, just like when we say that we have thought, speech, and action, a reason why we have it, because it evolves the way it comes milmaila from the higher realms, ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu, lahavdil. And so too, when we say the man has midas, it's because there's midas l'maila. As we know, in every world is the 10 sfirot. Again, also points which were clearly explicit in the previous chapters, or elaborate in previous chapters. There is the Chachma Bina Das, and Chesed Gvura Tiferes Netzach Hod Yesod Malchus, which exists of every world. The world that has, in every world, the Realm has the 10 spheres, and that's the reason why man, Ali Aretz, in this physical world, has these 10 faculties, is because everything down here evolves in the way it's L'mayla. So if we have it, ultimately it comes the way it's l'mayla, and ultimately the Eibishter Hashem himself has all these sfirot, all these faculties, kaviyachol, and all these, and the Kodesh Baruch Hu has chokhmah, and the Kodesh Baruch Hu has bina as yiti. And now, needless to mention, it's a total different chokhmah, it's a total different type of bina, a total different type of das, and total different type of set of midas. When you're dealing with the quality dimension of the midas, or of these faculties, because you're dealing with BAYT, with a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Here you're dealing with the greatest Chacham. Obviously his Chacham was mugbal, it's limited, because he is limited. Everything about man is limited, except his neshama, which is again a chelik kamimal, a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, man could truly serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in levels of Ein Sof, with all your might. There's something special to the Yid's ability of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because he has a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu within it, but we're not dealing with that right now. You're dealing with just to point out, there's obvious difference between our faculties and the way the faculties are l'mayla by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But one thing, what are we getting at over here? That just like it's lamata by man, that you take one letter in comparison to the world of speech, and the one letter becomes, again, in comparison to the world, to all the ability of man speak, all the letters that he did speak, or the koach nafshem, the amount of letters that he can't speak, that one letter is completely nothing in comparison to the world of speech of man. But you want to demonstrate more, and you say that it's not completely, you cannot say it's completely batel, means to say it's non-existent, because ultimately you're dealing with something which is similar to it, many letters, koach nafshi hamedaberes. So you go deeper within the soul, you say the non-existentness of this letter as being a non-existent letter in comparison to the world of Machshava, so then you could say it's truly non-existent, because the world of Machshava is a different type of letter. It's not the letter world of Dibur. Yet one might come yet one might argue, and again we'll just see how it is l'gabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is ultimately the message, because this world was created with a us of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem said Kibika Hashem, in other words, like the hay created the entire Ilam Hazeh. So take that one hay in comparison to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Dibur. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Machshava. We'll get to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the Nimshul, to the message over here. But let's go deeper within the Mashal, because this is how Rebbe goes on with the Mashal over here. That one can argue and say, true, in the world, in the face of Machshava, in the face of thought, this one us, this one letter of speech, is more, or rather, its symbol of a non-existent symbol is more evident in comparison to the world of Machshava. But wait. We just said that in the Machshava there are ultimately ICS, also there are letters. True, it's a different quality type of letter, it's a more soul type of letter, more subtle type of letter, but doesn't have that concreteness of Dibur, but letters they are. And if they're letters, so as much as with that you wanted to point out or put the one ut in the face of that, you cannot say this one ut, this one letter is totally, absolutely non-existent. Because you cannot use the absolute term of non-existent, because what is this? This is a letter. What is the whole world of Machshava, the world of thought? It's many letters. True, a different quality type of letters, but letters they are. So, just like someone's going to say, well, where do you see the insignificance of $1 in comparison to $1 million or comparison to $1 billion? Well, obviously, compared to the $1 million, because you can see how the $1 million, there's one, ultimately is comprised from ones. Then pull the one out of the million, you notice that there's no million, so the one has significance, but but nonetheless, you see how, to some degree, what's a dollar? And like we wanted to think about the practical terms, it's easier somebody who has $1 million in his pocket to put $1 into the pushka or so. Everybody has to give tzedakah, but just give as the example. But then you say, $1 in comparison to $1 billion, or $1 in comparison to $1 trillion, or 1 penny in comparison to $1 billion or $1 trillion. So obviously that 1 penny or the $1, again, or even more than that, that 1 penny loses more its existence. Kind of, what is it already? They canceled the penny over here. What is it already? It's a penny. But you say that no. You stop and say that, this billion and trillions of dollars are ultimately comprised from pennies. And take $1 trillion and pull out 1 penny, it's no more $1 trillion. So you're going to say that you want to say this penny is insignificant in comparison to the face of trillions of dollars, or $1 trillion, as much as you're going to say it's insignificant, which in a sense it is. What is a penny in comparison to all that? But if you want to go deeper and you say, hello, these trillions of dollars, as great as this number is, it's comprised from pennies and dollars and pennies, dollars and cents. Pull out that penny, mathematically, you pull out the penny of $1 trillion, there's no more $1 trillion. Oh, so the penny is something. And this is what the Rebbe is getting at. He says, as much as you put this ut of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in comparison to the Eisis and Machshava, to the world of thought, and you say, well, this ut is nothing, so the whole Eilam is ultimately nothing in comparison. Again, we'll see soon the Nimshul and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's whole, the makeup of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Dibur, is Machshava, but can you say it's taken nothing? You say yourself that in the world of Machshava there are, or the whole world of Machshava is comprised of many otiyot, letters. And what is this? This is a letter. So it's not an absolute, this term non-existent, you cannot use it in an absolute level, an absolute manner. It's not absolutely non-existent. And therefore the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us, Machshava, thought, is ultimately the garment of man. It's because it's the garment and the garment is a garment to a nefesh. Now, what is the nefesh? As we learned in the previous chapters, again, as we mentioned this before, starting from chapter Gimel, 3rd chapter, that in the nefesh itself is comprised from midas, and before that, starting from Chochmah, Bina, Das, the 3 intellectual faculties. That's the beginning of the structure of nefesh. Again, there are deeper levels within the nefesh, but the structured nefesh is comprised from Chochmah, Bina, Das, and the 7 midas, which ultimately produce the Machshava, Dibur, Maisa, thought, speech, and action, or the thought, speech, and action are a garment to the midas, but the midas are the pnimius of the neshama itself. Now, in the world of midot, In feelings, there are no letters. The whole phenomenon of otiyot, letters, initiate in the world of thought. And they become much more concrete, as we mentioned, in the world of speech. But in the world of midot, and how much more so in the world of the Chochmah Bina Das, there are no concept, there are no letters at all. It's just nefesh. It's an nafshi soul expression. Feelings are soul expression. There doesn't exist the whole phenomenon of letters. The whole phenomenon of letters start in the world of machshava, in the world of thought. So now we can understand how the term non-existent on one letter, or rather, you put that one letter in the face, not only in machshava, but in the face of the nefesh itself, the midot of the nefesh, the attributes of the nefesh, or the intellectual, more deeper even within the soul, the intellectual faculties of the nefesh, then you could ultimately use the term of absolute, in an absolute manner, the term non-existent, nothingness, because here you're dealing with in comparison, you're putting in the face, not how the atiyot a little more subtle, a little more refined, like in the world of machshava, of thought, but here you're placing it in the world, in the face of a reality which the whole phenomenon of atiyot doesn't exist. They don't exist. So this in comparison to that deeper level of the nefesh, you can say it's non-existent. And now he goes on in the next chapter, he's going to point out, or later in the next chapter he points this out, and he says even something deeper, which is so beautiful, as we will see in the chapter 21, let's not jump the gun over here. Let's use what the Alter Rebbe is getting at over here, that the Eibush Hashem himself, as we mentioned before, the reason why we have all these faculties and all these means of expression, ultimately our thought, speech, and action, is because it comes milmaila, it comes from the higher realms. Ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself has dibur, like it says, bidvar, obviously not to say, not to mention this again, but it says, lidvar Hashem Shamayim nasu basara bamarot, Mamarot nivra ha'olam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has thought, true, kiloi machshavotai machshavotechem, my thoughts are not like yours, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu has thoughts, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has midot, his chesed, and gvuro, and rachamim, and tiferes, and netzach, and hod, yisod. Elocha Hashem Agdula, V'Akvura, V'Tiferes, V'Netzach, V'Hoid Yisod, V'Hoid rather, Kichel Hashemayim V'Aretz, Elocha Hashem HaMamlacha. You have this whole setup of Midas L'Mayla. In the heavens, in the higher spheres, in the higher realms, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has HaKadosh Baruch Hu has them. And again, the whole reason why we have them is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has them, because it's there by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there's Chochmah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Bina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Das of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then this great HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which has all these faculties, and these faculties are way, like again, it's qualitatively different than the faculties, the way they're a human being. Be'ein arech le'ein kates, no comparison, even to negate this ein arech, it's a silly way that Hashem is greater. It's dealing with something. Dude, this is BAYT, this is nivra, this is God's faculties. So every faculty has this godly infinite energy. But let's just take this mashal and say this great God expressed himself with one letter, the letter of dibur. And this letter, in other words, within his dibur rather, in Hashem's speech, he took one letter and he created the entire world. The whole world to come was created with one yud. But he that one ot, for example, which this world was created, which is the hay, and place it in front of God's ability to speak, or all the words that God uttered, or all the words that God has the ability to utter, and bring that in faces of Hashem's machshavot, Hashem's thoughts. You could already there, especially dealing with Hashem's machshava. So one's going to say, well, the dibur also carries much more energy than man's speech. But look, even if you want to compare it, go into place that in front of Hashem's machshavot, and place that in front of the midot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, place that in front of the chabad of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This whole olam, especially when you're dealing, this whole world which was created with all that ot, is completely batel b'mtziut, is completely a non-existent entity in the face of the machshava of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the face of the dibur of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the face of machshava of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, just like we can argue by man, well, it's still otiyot, let's say by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and again, a very different level, but it's called machshava, so there's otiyot, there's still letters, so place it in front of the midot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, where the whole phenomenon of otiyot do not exist. Completely non-existent. and how much deeper when you deal with the Chokhmah Bina Das of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is a much deeper part of the Neshama, and certain Nefesh, which similarly it's a deeper part within HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which there for sure there's no atiyot, there's no letters. Take that one ut which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this entire world in the face of all that. It is completely nothing, non-existent. And much more than the one drop of the Mediterranean, as we could just understand of this little explanation. So we're going to see this insight today. We're going to try to go through a bit of the text, and hopefully Be'ez Hashem will get on to the following message which we just alluded to, and basically in a nutshell, I don't know why I'm mentioning it over here, but just to get on, just to point out what the Alter Rebbe is going to say, because one might think that, good, in comparison to all that, it's nothing. In comparison to all that, you could call it non-existent. But does it mean that it is non-existent on its own? Like that penny in comparison to millions and trillions of dollars, or to a level where pennies do not exist, again, trying to fit that this dimension Alter Rebbe deals with the midot, where the Eisiyat Atiyat don't exist, or Chachma Bina Das, the Eisiyat doesn't exist. But look at the penny. Could you say that you're not looking at a penny as a result? This is a penny, it's copper, and it's tender, you could feel it, you could hold it. So as much as you can say in face of something else, it's truly non-existent, but could you say that this is not? And therefore that tells us maybe the world ultimately is, which is different than the message which we had. It's not Kel Ha'olam, it's Kel Olam. That means just like before Hashem created the world, there was only a God, and now we don't say that there's two entities. There's a God and there's the world and there's a God. It's only about God. But how could you say that based on this question which we asked? As much as you're going to say in face of all that, it's a true, absolute non-existent. But you look at it, you can say that you're not touching that penny, or the object, as small as it might be. That one drop of the Mediterranean, you're going to say we're not holding a teaspoon of water? So here the Alter Rebbe in the 21st chapter is going to say, yes, maybe that's the way it exists by us. By the human being. But by Hashem, that even after or like someone, let's use the context of speech, that one letter that I uttered, in comparison of all that, it's truly non-existent. But could you say that you didn't hear me when I said that letter? Could you say that I could take back that letter? Like one has a problem of, like we mentioned this last week, what you think it's not such a problem of taking back a thought, but taking back a word. The other person heard it, it becomes something tangible, something concrete, and people have problems with something they uttered even in one word, even in one letter, one expression. Could you say that it's not? I heard it. And so to creation, ultimately Hashem did speak even with that one ut, but it's one ut, true, that one ut in comparison to all this which we mentioned, the bigger picture, it is truly non-existent. But is it not? Could you say that it's not? It's an ut. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. This is a world. We see the world. And here the Alter Rebbe is going to say that exists in the 21st chapter, exists by man. But when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even when he already expressed that ut, ultimately Hashem's whole energy is never removed from the world where he expressed that ut. So that ut, even where it is, it's ultimately not. But again, this seems a bit cryptic, perhaps, this last line, and we will see it as the Alter Rebbe will explain in the 21st chapter. But let's just try to go through a little bit of the text, as much as we can over here. So again, it'll be easier because we're going to understand what the Alter Rebbe is building up. The world of Machshava, where there is a tiyat, is just on a subtle level, as opposed to the Alter Rebbe is going to go on. There is a deeper level of the nefesh, which is the midas of man, which tiyat do not exist. The attribute, the faculties of attributes, or the attributes, right? The Chabad can also be called the attribute. In other words, the feelings of man, the faculties of feelings, midot, and then the faculties of Chachma Bina Das, of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Tiyot doesn't exist, so that one ut could again loses its complete significance, or it becomes a non-existent entity in comparison. So let's just see how we could read it inside. So again, we're holding the kolshkin much more that one ought to comparison to the inner garment of man, which is a statra machshava shemimenu nimshcha diburi, from their speech come from. V'hi chayusam, and this is their life. In other words, the energy of speech comes from the machshava, from thought. Ve'ein tzarich leimar gam lahus ma'atzmius hanefesh. How much more so that one letter, in comparison to the essence of the soul, which is Eser B'chinas Anal, which are the 10 faculties, the 10 levels, Chabad, Chochma, Bina, Das, Shemimenu Nimshechu Eisiyus HaMachshava Zu, from where these thoughts, these letters, Machshava emanate from, L'Meshes B'dibur Zeh, which are invested in the speech, Kishem Medaber, when the person speaks, Ki HaMachshava, and he says, why am I saying Kol Shkein, why am I saying this Kol Shkein, which means how much more so, because this is what Alter Rebbe again, as we read inside, Ki HaMachshava Gam Ki B'chinas Eisiyus K'mei HaDibur, because ultimately thought is also ICs, there are also letters in the world of thought, similar to the world of speech. The only thing is that the more spiritual, the more refined, the more soul type of letters. As opposed to when you're dealing with the 10 faculties of man, which is again is midot and is chacham bin das, and they're the source of machshava. There's no letters yet. Before they enter into the garment of thought. There's no letters yet. Then you can't say, well, it's a letter, and it's a quantitative difference or a quantitative difference. But again, with this. A quantitative and qualitative difference, you get it? There's no comparison at all, because that difference of quantitative and qualitative is comparing when you're dealing with Dibur and Machshava. It's more quality type of Eisa Machshava. But in Machshava there is Eisius, but in the Mid and Nefesh itself there is no Eisius. So then again, it doesn't. You can't say it becomes very small, or very minimal, or insignificant in comparison to. So here when you're dealing with the face of the nefesh itself, it's truly, absolutely a non-existent entity. And Alter Rebbe points out, shows us over here, as he explains us again in the following few lines. And we'll try to finish the chapter, even though it's a bit, you have some, but again, because we explained this, we'll be able to run through this in order to finish the chapter. Alter Rebbe is going to show us over here, He's going to show us over here how the whole phenomenon of letters initiate and commence in the world of thought. Before that, it doesn't even exist. He says, when it follows an expression, in other words, when a person arouses with a feeling and a desire, again, with the heart of man, before it ascends from heart into mind, to think about it, there's no letters yet. It is more of a divested, in other words, divested of letters, divested of structure. It is just a strong desire the person has, which means a very potent desire to this, that's like to this which he didn't give it yet structure. It is just a strong energy. It is a strong expression of this, a strong desire he has within his lev in order that's like to this which he desires. And how much more so the Alter Rebbe goes deeper within the nefesh, which is the intellectual faculties, which is Chochma Bina Das. He says the Kol Shkein Kedim Shenaf La Taiva V'Chem Nebelive. How much more so before it enters into his heart, Davar, a desire to this which he nechmad, which he is inclined to. But more than that, when this idea, when this was in the world of intellect, which means that, in other words, it was b'kayach chochmas v'sichel v'yos, it is kayach of understanding, is a kayach of wisdom, is kayach of intellect, is kayach of knowledge. When it was there, meaning to say before it developed, before it produced a feeling, a drive, a desire to it, it was still in the world of intellect, as we mentioned before, that feelings are offspring and a product of intellect. When you understand something thoroughly, that produces a feeling, I will be driven to it, or again, reverence of it, and so on and so forth. So before it entered into the world of heart, into heart, before it formed a feeling, when it was still in the intellectual faculties, or it was still in the world of intellect within man. In other words, the intellectual faculties were still dealing with it prior to its entering or producing a feeling. He knew that that is something good and sweet, and again, Teiv is good, Yafa is beautiful, or and Nechmad v'Naim, again, two expressions of sweet and pleasant and so on. He knew it was sweet and pleasant, good and beautiful. In other words, it was something which he intellectually understood that it's worth la'asigi l'davik by, to reach it, to cleave to it, to attain it. For example, to learn something intellectual, to learn some wisdom, particular concept, a particular idea, a particular study. So he understood in his mind that this is something which I should pursue. Or again, in his mind he understood the sweetness of this type of food, that I feel that, again, in a mind, my mindset is, I have my mindset in order to go ahead and pursue. Didn't enter my feeling yet, but in my mind I figure it out, and I understood, and this is something I would want to pursue, like a good sweet Michael, a good sweet food, Michael Arieh. So then, at that time, there's for sure, certainly no atiyot. There's no letters there. And when does the letters form? Only when it goes through the world of feelings. And then from there it enters into the world of machshava, of thought. Only then atiyot are produced, atiyot are born. So only after the feeling, the lust, aroused in his heart, because his mind, his intellect explained the virtues and the values of it, so it produced a feeling. And then again, the following step, it went from the heart to the brain, to think about it, how to execute this taiva from a state of potential, which is again the way that the taiva stands in the heart, in order to actuality, to reality, to make it something a practical, to connect to that desire at a practical level. So that is the function of thought, as we all know it. Once we have the taiva, then we put it into, we bring structure to that taiva, and the reason, because we want to bring it from a state, that taiva, from a state of koyach al apayel, from the potential state, into a payel, into a way to actually achieve it. Like he says, lahasig amaychel, to achieve, to reach, to get that type of food, or to achieve, to know how to figure out how am I going to enter that class, how am I going to assign to that study, and so on. How am I going to apply to actually find, to see how I could ultimately achieve that subject, achieve that wisdom, and so on. When you bring it into machshava, haribikan, only there, letters are produced in your mind, in your brain. Like these are the letters which, again, as they're known in the languages of every nation, which these letters, again, based on the particular language, is what people use to speak and to think all worldly matters. And this is the end of the BAYT.